Welcome to Sakshi TV special immigration show with attorney Mr. Parvathaneni from Managing Attorney at law firm of Parvathaneni and Brown. Please note that Sakshi TV now has 3 immigration shows every week. On Thursday at 5 p.m. EST with attorney Parvathaneni, Wednesdays at 5:30 p.m. EST with attorney Prashanti Reddy in English, and on Friday at 6 p.m. EST with Banu and Indra. Please tune in to ask your questions. If you are an immigration attorney and would like to join our special shows, please email us at usa@sakshi.com or call us at 866-725-7441. Before we begin the show, please note that the information provided on the show is not a legal advice and for general informational purposes only. Sakshi TV or its agents will not be responsible for use of information. If you need specific legal advice, please contact the attorney directly. Mr. Chan needs no introduction, but if you need consultation, please log on to spblawfirm.com for contact information. When you connect with them, don't forget to mention Sakshi TV. From the beginning, spblawfirm.com has put a wealth of free information and online tools in the hands of immigrant community and for the benefit of the US employers. The www.spblawfirm.com site provides you with the latest and cutting-edge information on US immigration laws and policies explained in terms you do not have to be a lawyer to understand. So today's topic is steps required after being selected in the H1B lottery, important consideration and etc. We will continue the knowledge session along with the news and updates on latest immigration followed by Q&A. Before we get into this topic, you can call us on the numbers on the screen for questions related to immigration and also ask tips. Hello Mr. Chan, before we get onto this topic, let us know how are you doing and if there are any latest immigration updates this week.
Sure. Thank you, Shivani, and thank you to all the viewers of Sakshi TV for joining in today. So there are a couple of important updates on the H1B side. So the H1B lottery is over. It was over last week of March. Now all the employers and their attorneys have been notified by USCIS. The filings have officially begun from April 1st. So the next couple of days will be very, very busy for a lot of employers as they try to wrap up their H1B filings. And then on the green card side, we have some updates. So in the last month's bulletin, the dates of filing chart moved by almost 1 year. And due to this sudden movement by almost 1 year, we have a lot of people trying to get their I-485s filed under EB2 category this month. So we have seen a lot of cases for green cards, for I-485s, for the Indian nationals in EB2 category being filed this month. And again, try to get the filings done as quickly as possible. So you can get into the queue as quickly as possible. And then one final update I have is regarding the premium processing for H4 and H4 EAD. So recently, last month, USCIS announced that they will make premium processing available to most I-539 and 765 forms. But then we see that this might not be effective until at least 2024. So the good news is, yes, we will have premium processing sometime down the line, but we might still have to wait for H4 and the H4 EAD, which lets the spouses of H1B visa holders to work. So that's in short a summary of the recent immigration updates.
Yes. Let's get on to our topic today. So, Mr. Chan, the H1B lottery for this year is now over. Can you please give us specific more updates on the H1B lottery?
Sure. So the H1B lottery is complete, at least the part one. So initial selections have been notified. So the employers as well as their attorneys, they have been notified through the My USCIS portal. And starting from April 1st, the employers are now allowed to file the actual H1B petitions. So now is the time where the actual H1B petition gets filed with USCIS, and that approval is what would get somebody onto H1B status. And this year, what we are seeing is that many people from outside USA have been filed in the lottery registrations. Normally, we see a lot of F1 students. For the H1B, the initial registration time, at least in the last 2 years, we mainly saw a lot of F1 students that have already been in US, either working in US based on their OPT or CPT status. Most of our filings were typically for those beneficiaries. However, this year, more than likely because of the strong job market in the IT industry, we are seeing a lot of filings from India. So people who are actually working in India right now, in good companies. So we have seen a lot of filings from those folks. So USCIS has not yet released the actual number of people that got into the lottery, but we definitely think that USCIS probably got a record number of registrations in the last 10 years or so, more than likely.
Yes. So, Mr. Chan, what is the percentage of people that got selected in lottery? Did USCIS release the data yet, or do you have any statistics based on your filings?
Sure. So on our side, based on the law firm, the filings that we have done in our law firm, we are looking at about 30% selection rate uh, in the entire pool. And this 30% includes both US masters as well as non-US masters. Because typically the percentage rate is a little higher when a company has more US masters beneficiaries because they have 20,000 more selections. So overall, what we are seeing is about 30% selection rate, and we have about 85,000 slots. And based on the last year's numbers, we had 308,000 registrations the prior year's lottery, and the year prior to that, we had 274,000 registrations. So clearly, based on the percentage we're seeing, we definitely had more than 308,000 registrations this year. And this data typically is released by USCIS over time. And the main thing to note is that the IT industry seems to be doing extremely well. There is a lot of requirements in the IT industry. There is a severe shortage of talented IT employees, and that's probably what has caused this spurt in the registrations. And that being said, in the early 2000s, 2001, 2000, Congress passed a law where we had more H1B visas than the standard 85,000 slots. But again, this year I don't see anything of that sort potentially happening. So more than likely, even though the industry demand is very high, there is a severe shortage. More than likely, we will not have more than 85,000 slots this year.
Yes. So, Mr. Chan, how does one check if one is selected in lottery? Is there any website to check this?
So to find out if somebody has been selected through the registration process for H1B, they have to log into the website my.uscis.gov. This is a website where one will be able to figure out if somebody's name has been selected in the lottery or not. And that being said, this website is accessible to either the employer or the attorneys of the employer. So only the employer will be able to log in, use their credentials, and check the status of their registrations. So unfortunately, this is not public data. So some employer or their attorney has to physically log in, and that is the only way somebody can check the status. Because normally for USCIS cases, people can go to the USCIS website, plug in the receipt notice, their receipt number, and check the status. But unfortunately for the lottery, the H1B registrations, that does not work, and they have to physically log into the website and use the employer credentials, or their attorney has to check. So that is pretty much the only way to check if somebody has been selected or not currently.
Yes. So, Mr. Chand, if one is selected in the lottery, do they get any notification by email or a letter from the USCIS?
So unfortunately for the registrations, USCIS does not mail any notices. Normally, for every case, they mail out the notices with the receipt number. Unfortunately don't do it for the H1B registrations, and they also do not email per se. But typically, what they do is once the lottery is over, the employer gets an email saying the selections are done. So they basically tell that you have to log into the website and then figure out if somebody is selected or not. And then if somebody is selected, what happens is once you log in, you will see a selection notice. And the selection notice is a document that has the number, the receipt number, the name of the employee that has been selected in the lottery, their date of birth, and all that information. And that notice has to be printed and it has to be submitted to USCIS when the actual H1B petition is filed. So if somebody is selected, the employer can download that notice, and typically the employer can provide that information. If some employee wants to see their selection notice, again, it's up to the employer, but the employer will have a notice that they can download, and share with the attorney or the employee once the selection is over.
So, Mr. Chand, can we expect a second lottery for the H1B selections? If so, when do you think will that happen?
So based on what we saw during the last 2 years with this registration process, this electronic registration process, there is a very good chance that we will have a second lottery. Based on last year, even a third lottery is also potentially possible. So, but definitely, I think we can definitely expect a second lottery, and this more than likely would happen in the later part of July. So July is when all of us can monitor for more updates. And if at all there is a third lottery, it more than likely will happen around the later part of November. So if it doesn't happen in November, more than likely it might not happen. But definitely, I think things to look for in the month of July and also month of November for more selections. And again, a lot depends on how many people do not file. And hopefully, since the IT industry is doing very good, there is a severe shortage of people. More than likely, everybody that has been selected in the lottery will go ahead and file in the next 90 days. So June 30th is the deadline. And until June 30th, USCIS will not even know how many people did not apply. And once June 30th ends, that's the cutoff. And that is the time when USCIS will do their data analysis and they will figure out how many people did apply, how many people did not apply. And that's why in July, we could have more selections based on this, how many people are applying in the next couple of days.
Yes, Mr. Chand. So, Mr. Chand, after lottery selection, what are the next steps to get the H1B approved? So, what should employer do and what should an employee do in order to get the H1B approval?
So the H1B lottery, the registration process, this is only the very, very first step in this entire process. The main work, the main work starts after one is selected in the registration process. Now that we know that so and so beneficiaries have been selected, the next immediate step is the employer and the employee work together and successfully get the H1B petition filed with USCIS. And this is the most important thing that needs to happen. And in terms of process, how do you do it? So the very first step starts with the employer. So the employer has to go to Department of Labor and file what is called LCA. So LCA means a labor condition application. So this is a document that is filed with Department of Labor. There is no fees to file this LCA application. It is completely free of cost. And the main purpose of this application, this LCA application being filed with Department of Labor, it is to let Department of Labor know where somebody will work, the exact work location, the exact title of their job, the exact occupation, whether it's a software developer job or whether it is a mechanical engineer job and so on. And what are the wages that the employee will pay the employee. So this is the information that is presented to Department of Labor. So this is the very first step. There is no cost to file the LCA with Department of Labor, but this is a mandatory step that has to be filed with the Department of Labor. This is a very quick and easy process. And once this information is submitted to Department of Labor takes 7 business days, approximately 7 days. So within 7 days, Department of Labor will come back and certify the LCA. And once the LCA is certified, that is when the employer can now file the H1B petition with USCIS. So now comes the second step. The LCA is certified. And the second step is where the actual H1B petition is being filed with USCIS. And not only the H1B petition is being filed with USCIS, but the employer also has to pay the fees. So the H1B filings are very expensive. These are expensive filings. And the fees, depending on the size of the employer. The employer is a small employer, they have a different fees. The employer, it's a big employer with a lot of people, it's a different fees. If the employer has a lot of H1B employees, it's a different fees. And the fees is typically between $1,710 and the max it could go is $6,460 if it's a very, very large company with a lot of H1B employees. So this is the step where the H1B petition is drafted and filed with USCIS. And this is the step where the employer works with the employee. The employee will not sign on any documents, on any I-129 form documents. However, the employee is supposed to submit the passport, submit the educational documents, maybe accept the offer letter. So there are a couple of documents that the employer will require from the employee. And this is where the employee and the employer work together and make sure all the documents are in order, make sure that the degree, the mark sheets, the degree copy, everything is in order. And then they're submitted to USCIS. So this is the critical step. So again, end to end, if the employer starts right away, I would say it is a 10 to 14-day process before the LCA is certified, the petition is drafted, and the petition is ready to be mailed out to USCIS. Overall, this is an important process. One cannot afford to make a mistake. And this is the part where somebody has to ensure that it is done accurately and then file it with USCIS. And once the file reaches USCIS, what typically happens is USCIS issues a receipt notice. And this is something that is sent in the mail, in the physical mail, postal mail. And once this copy is received by the employer will be able to track the status. And that is when the waiting game starts. And the actual approval can take anywhere between 1 month to 6 months. So this is where the employer is able to track the status online. So anybody can use a receipt number, go online and check the status. And typically that is the time where we're waiting. And once the approval is over, somebody, if they're already in the country, they get into H1B status. If somebody is outside the country, they have to go to the embassy, get visa stamping, and then prepare to come into US. So this is the overall steps that need to be followed. And as a summary, it's a quick process, but it has to be done carefully. And the employer and employee working together in tandem will make sure that the petition is filed appropriately and they get an approval on time, so they can quickly get into H1B status and start working for the company.
Yes. So, Mr. Chand, if passport used for the H1B lottery has now changed or expired and one has new passport, will it be okay as the lottery selection now has the incorrect passport number now?
Right. So, as the part of the registration process, one has to give the passport number and the selection notice. The selection notice will have the passport number. And in this case, it will have the old passport number. And the selection notice, when it is submitted to USCIS, a lot of people have this concern that now their passport number has changed. But again, to avoid any issues, what they should be doing is they should document the old passport as well as the new passport in their H1B petition when their H1B petition is filed with USCIS. And the minute they're able to prove that registration belongs to them, and now that they have a new passport, they're using the new passport, USCIS should not cause any issues.
Yes. Mr. Chand, what will happen if there are any typographical issues such as name, spelling issue or date of birth being incorrect during the H1B lottery filing? And will this name or data or the date birth mistakes cause any issue during the actual H1B filing?
Sure. So the general rule is the registration notice should correctly identify the beneficiary. And if there is any inconsistency, either a name issue or a date of birth issue, typically it could cause an issue in general. However, if it is a very, very minor typographical mistake, maybe the date of birth, a simple mistake, for example, the year and month got swapped, or a character in the name got missed, a very minor issue. But however, the passport number matches. So because the passport number correctly identifies the beneficiary, so yeah, even though there is a minor issue with the date of birth or a minor issue with the name, overall, we can argue that it is the same person. So in that case, at least what we have seen last year as well as the year before that is that USCIS has been a little bit lenient on the typographical mistakes. Even if there is an issue with the name or the date of birth, overall, if they are able to identify that it is the same person, either by looking at the passport number on the selection notice or overall looking at what kind of a mistake was made, we have not really seen any issue. And when the actual approval notice was generated, we are seeing that the correct name is being given. And what that means from the employer or the employee perspective is, when the I-129 is filed with USCIS, make sure the correct name goes and this issue is documented and an explanation given to USCIS. And by doing so, there should not be any issue and they should be able to go ahead with the filing.
Yes. So, Mr. Chand, can one self-apply for the H1B if selected in the lottery without going through the employer?
So when the H1B, the lottery selection happens and the selection notice is generated, it will have the name of the employer on the top. And unfortunately, the current rules do not allow anybody to apply for self-sponsor for a H1B. For a green card processing, there are some ways. Some people might be able to self-sponsor for a green card under some categories. But when it comes to H1B, we always have to have an employer, and that employer has to sponsor the employee. Unfortunately, the employee, even if the employee is very, very well qualified, very, very highly talented, they have to rely on a job offer and they cannot self-sponsor or self-apply.
Yes. So, Mr. Chand, can one apply through some other employer and transfer the lottery selection to other employer after being selected in the lottery with the one employer before?
So when somebody has a selection notice, that only that employer should apply. But there are scenarios where that employer, some reason, either decides not to go ahead with the filing or lays somebody off. And there comes a situation where we have people coming to us and asking whether, if not that employer, can some other employer reuse the same registration notice and do something like a transfer to another employer. Unfortunately, the registration notice cannot be transferred. That same employer has to file the H1B. They have to get an approval, and only once an approval happens, only after that point, a new employer can transfer their employment. But until the H1B is filed, H1B is approved, one cannot transfer to a new employer.
Yes. Mr. Chand, if there are any prior F1 rejections or denials or prior H1B rejections, will it cause any issues when the H1B is filed after being selected in the lottery?
So whenever the new H1B application, the new petition is being filed with USCIS, there are a couple of questions about prior rejections. F1 rejections or denials are not even asked in the H1B petition. But if there is any prior H1B rejection, a prior H1B denial in the past, it has to be disclosed in the petition, and it has to be answered in the I-129 form. It will not cause any issue. It will not impact the current filing unless there is any fraud in the prior filing. If there is no fraud in the prior filing, but somebody got a denial or a rejection, it will not make any difference. The only thing is it has to be disclosed, and then the filing has to be done. And what we have seen is, even if somebody has got any denial in the past, and now that reason has been corrected, one should not see any issues in the current filings.
Yes. So, Mr. Chand, are there any travel restrictions after applying for the H1B visas, or can the H1B applicants travel after filing?
So there are some travel restrictions during this process, during this entire H1B cap filing process. And if anybody has any travel plan, especially if somebody is already working in US on F1 status or some status in US, and they want to travel during this period, definitely consult with your employer and also your attorney before finalizing your travel plans. This is because USCIS has strict rules when somebody is in US and trying to change status to H1B. Because typically, if somebody is in US and they're filing for H1B, they're typically either on F1 student status or H4 spouse of H1 status, or some people are on L1 status, and they're trying to get converted and change their status to H1B. And the current rules say that whenever a change of status request is filed, one cannot travel. If one travels, the change of status part of the request will get denied. And what that typically means is, yes, the H1B can still be approved even if they travel, but more than likely they will have to get stamping at the consulate because the change of status has been denied. So to avoid complications because of travel, and because there are some strict rules regarding travel, if you have change of status involved in the filing, one should always make sure that they make travel plans only after consulting with their attorney and their employer, And that being said, even if there is an emergency travel, there are ways. Just make sure you consult with your attorney, so they will be able to give you options, because travel will always complicate things when a change of status request is in process.
Yes. So, Mr. Chan, can the F1 employees on OPT continue to work even after OPT expires if the H1B is filed?
So a lot of F1 employees currently typically work on OPT status or CPT status while their H1B is in process. It is very common that somebody is working and parallelly their employer is filing a H1B for them. And in general, the rule is that F1 students having OPT, they either have OPT or CPT, most of the people. If you have OPT, they are typically allowed to work until their end date on their employment authorization document, on their EAD card. So the issue is, what if somebody's EAD card expires in between after their H1B filing? Say we do a H1B filing now, this month, and in 10 days, April 20th, say their EAD card expires, their work authorization expires. What do they do? However, luckily, there is a rule that says that if the EAD card expires after the H1B is filed, there is an automatic extension of their work status until September 30th. And what that means is somebody on OPT status, a student on OPT status, can continue to work until September 30th, even if their EAD card expires. So that's a big benefit to people, to students whose EAD card expires. And the only thing that somebody has to do to get this benefit is to ensure that their H1B is filed before their OPT ends. So before their EAD card expires, they have to make sure that the H1B is filed. And by doing so, they will get an automatic extension until September 30th.
Yes. So, Mr. Chan, as we conclude, can you please give any suggestions and tips for the H1B aspirants as their employers file the H1Bs in the next few months?
Sure. The most important advice I would give them is, make sure your petition is thorough and it is filed as quickly as possible. Don't wait until the last minute. June 30th is the deadline, but that does not mean that somebody should wait until June. My advice is file it as quickly as possible, and if possible, file it in April. So your application is on the top. And what that means is you don't have to worry about premium processing down the line because it is taking too long. More than likely, you will get a quick approval. And not only that, you can ensure that your case is properly filed before the deadline, and there are no surprises down the line.
Yes. It was wonderful having you on our show, Mr. Chan, again. Let us meet again next week. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for the viewers for tuning in. You're watching Sakshi TV with me, Shivani Raj.